One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 then versus now comparisons between Peter Jackson's Middle-earth films and the Rings of Power TV series.
They said it would be over quickly. But the war left Middle-earth in ruin. And would last centuries.
For this list, we're looking at the differences between Peter Jackson's Middle-earth movies and Amazon's TV series The Rings of Power. Consider this your spoiler alert. What would you want to be in Middle-earth? Human? Elf? Dwarf? Hobbit? Orc? Tell us in the comments. Number 10. The time period. Peter Jackson's films take place during the Third Age of Middle-earth. This period began after Sauron was defeated by the last alliance of elves and men. Think the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring.
That Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword.
It ended with his final defeat and the departure of the ring-bearers from Middle-earth.
For Frodo.
The Rings of Power, however, is set earlier in the Second Age. This began with the fall of Morgoth and is characterized by the rise of his lieutenant Sauron and the forging of the rings.
In the end, Morgoth would be defeated, but not before much sorrow. For his orcs had spread to every corner of Middle-earth.
In contrast to Jackson's films, The Rings of Power covers thousands of years of history. That timeline has been compressed to create a continuous narrative. Number 9. Source material. Peter Jackson's trilogies adapted The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, although he took notable creative liberties with the former in particular. While both books have the detailed narratives of novels, Tolkien's other works, such as The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, are more collections of stories with an almost biblical tone.
We thought our light would never dim. So when the great foe Morgoth destroyed the very light of our home, we resisted.
Some of this material made it into the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. Unable to secure the rights to The Silmarillion, Amazon based The Rings of Power on these appendices. There are a lot of gaps between major events, which the writers have filled with a more or less original story. You might notice, however, that the production design is very similar to the films. That's in part thanks to legendary illustrator John Howe, who served as conceptual designer on both the movies and show.
Go back to the shadow. You shall not pass!
Number 8. Casting. There's a lot of debate around representation in fantasy. It's sometimes argued that Tolkien wanted to create a mythology for England, although this is not a quote from Tolkien. Such an intention was at most implied in his letters. Of course, myths by nature are living stories that change to reflect the times. The Lord of the Rings movies feature various fantasy races: humans, elves, dwarves, hobbits, and wizards, all of whom are white.
So be it. You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Right. Where are we going?
The only actors of color with lines portray orcs.
On the halflings! On the halflings!
There are some great female characters, 3, but mostly it's a story about men. The Rings of Power changes this up. Galadriel is a central character. Lenny Henry portrays a Harfoot elder. Cynthia Adai Robinson plays Númenorian Queen Regent Miriel, Sofia Nomvete plays Dwarven Princess Disa, and Ismael Cruz Cordova plays the Sylvan elf Arondir.
Past is with us all. whether we like it or not.
Number 7. Sauron. When you hear the name Sauron, what first springs to mind might be the fiery eyeball depicted in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy. In the prologue of Fellowship, we also see Sauron in armor, towering over his mortal foes. He has a similar appearance in the first episode of The Rings of Power.
A cruel and cunning sorcerer. They called him Sauron.
However, after Morgoth's defeat, Sauron seemingly disappears. As the books describe, when he returns, he's, quote, not yet evil to behold, and ensnares the elves in his machinations, manipulating them into forging the Rings of Power.
And so, we hunted. To the ends of the earth, we hunted Sauron.
This means he takes on a very different appearance in the show. Number 6. The relationship between elves, men, and dwarves.
They're leaving Middle-earth, never to return. I don't know why. It makes me sad.
In Peter Jackson's films, the elves mostly keep to themselves and are preparing to leave Middle-earth for Valinor. In The Rings of Power, they still rule the roost, and tensions simmer between elves and men. The elves' distrust is rooted in the war against Morgoth, in which many from the east and south sided with the enemy. Naturally, men resent being painted with the same brush as their ancestors.
The lot you lump us in with died off 1,000 years ago. When are you people gonna let the past go?
The relationship between Legolas and Gimli in The Lord of the Rings also established that elves and dwarves don't usually get along. While suspicions are still high in The Rings of Power, Elrond's friendship with Prince Durin IV creates a bridge between their races.
To an enduring union between our two great peoples, Khazad and Noldor.
To the Union.
To the Union.
Number 5. Khazad-dûm, Moria.
Behold, the great realm and dwarf city of Dwarrowdelf.
There's an eye-opener and no mistake.
The Lord of the Rings sees the Fellowship enter the mines of Moria, a name that means the Black Pit. It was once the great dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm, until the dwarves awoke a Balrog and were forced to abandon their city. Gimli expects to find a welcome there from his cousin Balin, who had ventured out to reclaim the halls and restore them to their former glory.
Drums in the deep.
But once inside, the Fellowship only finds horror and death. In The Rings of Power, we get to see Khazad-dûm in all its splendor at the height of its glory. With roaring waterfalls, working mines, twinkling lights, and lush greenery, it's a very different place from where Balin met his end. Number 4. Wizards.
Are there any?
What?
Are there wizards?
There are 5 of us. The greatest of our order is Saruman, the white. Then there are the 2 blue wizards. I've quite forgotten their names.
Gandalf is one of the most iconic characters from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and played a key role in the War of the Ring. Other wizards in the Third Age include their corrupt leader Saruman and Radagast.
Sorry.
Also called the Istari. These wizards are Maiar, divine spirits that also included Sauron. Tolkien described them as arriving in Middle-earth during the Third Age. However, in later writings, he suggested that 2 Istari, called the Blue Wizards, arrived in the Second Age.
What about your name? You. You don't remember, do you? Suppose you did fall quite a long way. Anybody's head would be a bit higgledy-piggledy.
In The Rings of Power, the Stranger, played by actor Daniel Wayman, seems to be one of the Maiar. Although, as of writing, the show hasn't revealed his identity. Number 3. Galadriel.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea!
Only a few characters from Peter Jackson's films also appear in The Rings of Power. Robert Aramayo plays a younger, less cynical Elrond, replacing Hugo Weaving, and Galadriel has had an even bigger transformation.
Look at you now. Commander of the Northern Armies, warrior of the Wastelands. I half expected you to arrive caked in grime and mud.
Cate Blanchett's Lady of Lothlorien was soft-spoken and ethereal, while Morfydd Clark's version is a warrior and commander. While Tolkien didn't focus on her as a warrior, he did describe her as, quote, of Amazon disposition in her youth, strong and athletic. Her nickname was Nerwen, meaning man-maiden, and she, quote, fought heroically in battle.
Swordsmanship is about balance rather than strength. Fight with your feet, not your arms.
Clark captures something of Blanchett's portrayal, but her Galadriel, who is some 5,000 years younger, is more flawed, impulsive, and less removed from the world. She's a leading lady rather than a supporting role. Number 2, The Realms of Men. At the beginning of Peter Jackson's films, the men of the West reside mostly in the lands of Rohan and Gondor. Rohan is ruled by King Theoden, and Gondor is under the protection of a line of stewards.
Minas Tirith, City of Kings.
The true king, Aragorn, is of the blood of Númenor, but has not yet returned to reclaim the throne. In the Rings of Power, Rohan and Gondor are not yet founded. Aragorn's ancestors still live on the island of Númenor, which we finally get to see on screen, but which is due a dramatic fall from grace.
The island kingdom of Númenor.
In the Southlands, Mordor has not yet been established. The land is still green, inhabited by men, and watched over by the elves, but the orcs are beginning to move in. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. Hobbits vs. Harfoots.
Concerning hobbits. Hobbits have been living and farming in the four farthings of the Shire for many hundreds of years, quite content to ignore and be ignored by the world of the big folk.
The men of Middle-earth are not the only race to have moved about the map. By the time Peter Jackson's films begin, the elves have built Rivendell, the dwarves have abandoned Khazad-dûm, and the hobbits have settled in the Shire and the lands around. Hobbits are traditionally an unadventurous people, but their ancestors migrated all the way from the other side of the Misty Mountains.
Haven't you ever wondered? What else is out there? How far the river flows, or where the sparrows learn the new songs they sing in spring. I can't help but feel there's wonders in this world, beyond our wandering.
They were divided into Harfoots, Stoors, and Fallowhides, but Harfoot traits came to dominate. They're described as, quote, browner of skin and beardless. According to Tolkien, Harfoots were the first to reach Eriadur, the land where the Shire was founded.
Eleanor Brandyfoot, with your father's nose and always poking us into trouble. You are far too curious and meddlesome to have been born a Harfoot. Are you quite certain you're not part squirrel?
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.